Namaste. Well, we had a nice Kriya on meditation this morning, and I don't much feel like talking. Today's subject is Yogic Diet. What should the yogi eat? And in order to understand this subject, we have to think about who we are and the way that we're made. Underneath the surface of the body, there's something else going on. We know that if you take a body that's not alive and you put air into it and food into it, then it still doesn't work. And so we know that there's something else going on. And within our own awareness, we realize, depending on our current state of consciousness, that there is more happening underneath the surface of life, and it's not just the things that we experience through the senses. And the teachings of both East and West give us an understanding about what is underneath the surface. God is omnipresent spirit. God is beyond the creation. God has become the creation. We are all parts of God. We describe the soul as individualized spirit. What is spirit? Omnipresent consciousness of bliss, love, peace, joy, understanding. And so the creation is made in such a way as everything comes from God into the creation. And it starts in the realm of thought, the causal realm, and then becomes further from spirit in the astral realm, light and energy, and then into the physical realm, matter, the senses, the personality. The personality that we experience in this world is the ego, and the ego is the soul identified with the body. So we have taken on the costume of this body, but it is activated underneath by a power that is separate from the body. Just the way if you took the light. The light by itself doesn't shine unless you plug it into the electricity. And it's God's cosmic life force that keeps everything going. So underneath the physical body, we are light and energy. So we come into this physical form and then we think that we need the things of the body. But as it says in the Bible, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth from the mouth of God. The mouth of God is the medulla oblongata. This is where the human body begins, in the womb, and it grows from that point and is animated by that divine life force. And so we actually live mostly on life force, and secondarily on the air and food. We need sunlight as well. And it's interesting in the autobiography of a yogi, and there's a long yogic tradition of saints who eat nothing or very little. There's two women saints in autobiography of a yogi, Giribala and Teresa Neumann, who both lived without eating for many years. And one of the things that I always found entertaining was that Teresa Neumann was not skinny. She was robust. So, and they tested her. They put her into the hospital and watched her for weeks. She only thinks she didn't drink water, but she did take the communion wafer, which was part of her religious tradition. And I don't know if you've ever had one of those, but there's not much to it. It's really almost paper thin, and not a meal. Definitely not a meal. And this was she had a skylight in her home. And when Master visited her, he described her home and the light, and he talked about the cosmic life force and how it's unfortunate that more people don't know how to live, that this is the reality, that we can live on the cosmic life force. Well, why don't we? Well, because our consciousness is not on that level. There's another place in the autobiography of a yogi where Master just mentions, and maybe it was Sir Teshwar, Babaji living in the Himalayas. Now, Babaji is the ever-living master in the Himalayas, maintaining his body in his mid-30s. And he eats occasionally some rice, some dal. We know that when he has a party, they make the Babaji drink. Bananas, milk, and raisins. A little bit of rose water. I wonder where they go to get that stuff up there in the hot Himalayas. He doesn't need to shop the way most of us do. And I don't think they have much to do with junk food, with super processed foods. But they don't need much. They eat very little. And this is the longest standing tradition of yogis is you just don't eat that much. But when Master traveled back to India in the mid-30s, Master wasn't very tall. And he said that when for about a year and a half, he was back here in India and he had banquet after banquet after banquet. And it would be rude not to eat. So he packed on the pounds, and fortunately in India, there's this wonderful tradition that the gurus are supposed to be robust. That means they have a lot of disciples and that they're appreciated. But when Kriyanandaji met Master, his observation of Yoganandaji was that he ate very little. And that he had a little container, he had some nuts and dried fruits in it. And when he went out to eat, he would, nibble a little bit. But he wouldn't, of course, the Master used to enjoy cooking. And he would cook foods for the disciples. Many people don't realize that one of the businesses they created in the early years of the Hollywood Church and in Encinitas, they used to make carrot juice, and they sold it commercially. They had a small plant where they made fresh carrot juice. And they also, many people don't realize this, but to the best of my knowledge, Master is the inventor of the veggie burger. They called them mushroom burgers. And they had a restaurant, health food store, I don't think they had a store, a cafe at the Hollywood Church. And they were quite well known. And it was a popular place. So, yogis aren't supposed to eat much. But then Master taught something that was very interesting. He said that we should follow what he called proper Etarianism. Proper Etarianism, which wasn't vegetarianism. It was proper Etarianism. And the reason he called it this is because instead of looking at diet from a nutritional point of view or from a cultural point of view, he looked at it from a spiritual point of view. And what is the purpose of life? To uplift our consciousness. So when we look at life from a spiritual point of view, what we're trying to ascertain is, how do my actions affect my spiritual life? And how can I make conscious choices that will improve my spiritual consciousness, the upliftment of my consciousness? So we look at food in terms of how it affects our consciousness more than the details of nutrition. And In fact, and this is something else that's interesting, is it's very common when people come onto the spiritual path that they're really interested in diet. The thing is that they're becoming more conscious of how they live. So it's natural that food is a pretty important and regular activity, and so people begin to be more conscious of what they're eating. But sometimes people think that they can eat their way to higher consciousness. That automatically, by fasting, by eating a vegetarian diet, by drinking enough carrot juice, that you can achieve a higher state of consciousness. That is an incorrect thinking, actually. The thing to understand is that the upliftment of our consciousness is not dependent on what we eat or don't eat. But what we eat or don't eat can affect the ease of the upliftment of that consciousness, whether it's easy or more difficult. But a master can eat anything. When you become fully liberated and your consciousness is freed from the laws that most people live by, then they can transmute any negative energy into a positive energy. They can be protected from any negative energy. So the story in autobiography where the guru is given the poison, and instead of the guru being affected by it, the fellow who gave it to him is. So there are mechanisms that come into play when you raise your consciousness sufficiently. And then we have these stories of yogis that are buried for extended periods of time. They don't breathe and they don't eat. And then when you bring them back up, they get up and walk. But this is not the circumstance of the ordinary person. Now, the ordinary person on planet Earth today is very physical conscious. And because of that physical consciousness, they believe and are immersed in the thought that they need to eat heavy foods that are associated with physicality. So the mountain men, the lumberjacks, and they want beef. They want to eat a lot of beef. And if they're warriors, meat. But if you're a ballet dancer, you can't eat those kinds of foods. They don't work. They don't work for what you're trying to accomplish. So if we begin to live consciously, proprietarianism means pay attention to how your body, your mind, and your spirit and your emotions react to what you eat. See, we're used to not thinking about how food affects us. The only effect is filling of the stomach. This is important. And the stimulating of the taste buds. They should enjoy what you're eating. And that we should generally feel strong, but if we feel like taking a nap after eating, that's okay too. So I know when we have a big celebration, like Thanksgiving is the eating holiday of the year in America. So what you do is you basically eat the biggest meal of the year until you can't eat anymore, and then you chat for a while, and then you eat some more. And that seems to be the main purpose, because the thanking part is about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then the rest is hours of eating. And the physical satisfaction of eating is the greatest reason why we eat. Not that our bodies need it, but that we want it, that we enjoy it as a sensual experience. But then, because the body becomes used to it, then it begins to require it. So if you've become used to eating meat, if you're a meat eater, a carnivore, and you justify it because we have a couple sharp teeth, then if you stop eating meat, then your body will have a reaction to that, and it may rebel. And the story is told about Dr. Lewis, and he had physical problems after becoming vegetarian. And Master said, well, wait a minute. He closed his eyes. Suddenly he understood what was going on. And he said, your cells are crying out for the meat that they're used to. Eat again, and it'll go away. And it did. And then I personally had the experience when I became vegetarian. I decided to do it, and I did it, what we say, cold turkey, which I should have said cold vegetable, but I just stopped. And then I began to have ulcer-like symptoms. And of course the doctors couldn't figure out what it was, except to observe that I told them that I had stopped eating meat. So they said, well, why don't you try eating meat again? After all these tests, their scientific method was, yeah, why don't you just try to eat meat again? And of course I did. But then because I was becoming more sensitive, more consciousness, I decided that I would eat only organic meat. So I only ate the beef that was grew up naturally. And of course this is a common raising of our understanding about how we eat to begin to eat more holistically. So we want to eat foods that are not full of steroids and growth hormones and food coloring and excessive processing. All of that stuff diminishes life force, but it also introduces negative energies. And this is something that the average person doesn't understand about food. Food is consciousness. Food is not just nutritional value. You're eating the consciousness of that food. Everything in life is alive. When you take in, and conscious to maybe a very limited consciousness, but nevertheless conscious. So one of the reasons we don't want to eat meat is because the animals are alive, aware. And when they're killed, they become afraid. And in some cases, angry. So you're taking in that anger and negative consciousness. And the consciousness of the person who kills them. And the environment in which that takes place. Which is the same as the kitchen. It's not just the food that comes out of the kitchen, but it's the vibration of the food. And isn't this why mom's food is best? Every mom isn't the greatest cook in the world. But to the child, she's the greatest cook. Why? Because her vibrations are in it. Her love is in it. And the foods that you grow up with, that you enjoy the most, these are your comfort foods, but not necessarily the same comfort foods that other people would eat. Because there's a consciousness, the environment in which you ate them was part of your experience. And when you get older, when you eat some food that you enjoyed as a child, sometimes you still enjoy it, but sometimes you no longer enjoy it. Some foods, your consciousness begins to evolve in certain ways, and you no longer enjoy some of the things that you liked as a child. This is common with sweets. Certain kinds of sweets, when you're a child, you can handle more sugar. But when you get older, you're going, well, maybe that's a little sweeter than what I really need. Because your tastes become a little bit more refined. So, in understanding consciousness, how we're affected by what we eat, this is really the central teaching of yoga, and not that the instructions about specific eat this or don't eat that are really quite secondary. Because people are more or less affected by any given ingredient in their food according to their heredity, their environment, and their consciousness. These all have an effect, and they're sensitivities. So as we become more conscious, more aware, then we can begin to make choices based on that awareness. This is the important thing to understand about food. Now, when you have a very active life, then you need, unless you're higher consciousness, you need a more active diet. Food that's more rajasic, food that has more energy, a substance. Where if you're working in an office and even though brain power takes energy, you don't need the same number of calories and the kind of the bulkiness of the food as someone who works with their bodies all day long. So we have to understand that we adjust our diet to the way that we're using our body and the reaction of our body, mind, and spirit to that input. So, vegetarianism. We don't require people to be vegetarians, but we point out that there are disadvantages to eating meat. And Master said, if you're going to eat meat, then I'll try to avoid beef and pork, because those two animals are more highly evolved and therefore put more negative energies into the dying process under the circumstances that most of them live in. As well as meat is much more difficult to digest physically. Many people don't realize how much energy, we use energy to digest. It's not just a one-way street. We don't just get energy from it, but we use energy. And you can tell how you're affected by these things if you begin to notice how your body and mind and emotions react. And you find that as a generality, people who eat beef and pork tend to be more aggressive and reactive and tied more firmly to the ego. They respond with strong ego consciousness. So we want to eat foods that are lighter, that are more uplifting. So yogis talk about foods that are heating and cooling to the system. And for example, yogurt. Yogurt is cooling to the system. Meat would be very heating to the system. Generally speaking, the human body is an omnivore, and it's really designed to eat a variety of foods, of which meat is we're capable of eating it, but it's very low on the quality of food that we're really designed to eat. And Sri, if you're interested in this subject further, the Holy Science by Sri Yukteswar discusses this subject in depth as to why man is not a carnivore. So, but there's things that we can observe about what we eat. For example, spices. This subject has come up recently. I've talked to a few people about it. Because they began to notice, if you notice how you feel after eating, but also notice how you're dreaming after eating. So now we usually say, well, you should eat, you shouldn't go to bed at night on a full stomach. Really, and this is a cultural habit in this country that's really not very beneficial. The eating late and then going to bed not long after eating. And the thing is, when you begin to notice it, you realize that the heaviness of the food, for example, if you're trying to go to sleep, but the digestive system is gearing up to be busy, then, and of course, this is why people are tired after they eat a big meal. The body is saying, whoa, we have a lot of work to do. Let's slow everything else down so we can handle this large input of food that we need to digest. So now, and this is why we say don't eat a big meal before you meditate. Because your body's saying we need to digest, not withdraw the energy. And this is what we do in sleep as well. Except in sleep we go into subconsciousness. In meditation we try to go into superconsciousness. But if you observe what you eat, when you ate it, and then begin to observe your dreams, and you'll find that I've experienced this very much. Of course, yogis say you shouldn't eat, basically you shouldn't eat spices. Spices are rajasic. They're very activating. But yogis do say that you're allowed to enjoy what you eat. The idea that you should never enjoy what you eat is not strictly a teaching of yogis. Though many yogis who emphasize brahmacharya and non-attachment and tapasya, they will emphasize those kinds of things. But generally, those teachers emphasize the physical side of yoga and not the transcendent side. You cannot eat your way to omnipresent consciousness by eating purely. There was a man who wrote a book when I was a young man. He wrote it in the 50s. And he had health problems. And often it's health problems that lead people to explore eating more consciously. And he wrote a book called The Mucusless Diet Healing System. His name was Arnold Ehret. I really liked his book, and I felt that his discussion of how we were affected by food was, it made a lot of sense to me as I experienced eating food in my body. But then, at the end of the book, it ends up that, he, through eating perfectly in this system that he had, basically never eating bad stuff, only eating good stuff, mainly fruit, and sunlight, bringing in a lot of sunlight. And he became so purified physically that if you cut him, he would heal almost instantly. His body, the life force in his body, it wasn't wasted on all kinds of other stuff. So it was available for that. And the thing is, when he was 54, he got hit by a car and died. And I'm like, well, I mean, it was nice that he got healthy. I think that's a good thing. But it's looking at the smaller picture. So remember, the reason we want to keep the temple clean and healthy is for God realization, not for look. If you eat really healthy and you live an extra 5, 10, 20 years, 30 years, even if you lived another 50 years, so what? Without self-realization, you've just got more problems. That's really not the highest goal. There was a man who said to Yoganandaji, "I've cheated St. Peter 3 times by drinking carrot juice." And the master said, when St. Peter calls, you can bathe in carrot juice. Won't do you any good. So, when you eat foods that affect your consciousness, well, all food affects your consciousness, but when you eat foods that affect your consciousness before you meditate, before you go to sleep, then you can actually be aware of it and see how you're affected by it. So eat fruit before meditating, eat a big meal before meditating, and see what happens. We learn from experience. We learn about these things. And I mentioned this thing, you see, onions, for example, and garlic, both have medicinal values. But they're also recommended by yogis that you shouldn't eat them because they're very rajasic. So it was my observation that if I ever ate raw onions before sleeping, my dreams were, war was going on in there. They were very active and tended to be violent. And but I observed that if they were cooked, that was less so. And then of course if I began to just avoid them when possible. But I didn't, when I first became vegetarian, I became very fanatical about what I was eating. But then I learned that Master taught that we should not be fanatical about what you eat. And when he heard that the monks were fasting for extended periods of time, he said, don't do that. That's not necessary. So, but each according to your body. I know people, one person I'm thinking of, she's, as long as I've not known her for 40 years, she's a person who has always eaten what her body tells her to eat. And has been healthy, mostly healthy her whole life. But I really admired this approach. This approach is basically pay attention to how your body is affected by what you eat. If you have health issues, you may be forced into this. If you're diabetic or hypoglycemic, you'll be very aware of how your energy level is affected. But also begin to be aware of how your consciousness, your peace, the restlessness of the mind. And again, you can perceive this, if you're aware of your dreams, then you can begin to perceive this. I propose the experiment, see if you can perceive it. And if you perceive anything, what is it that you're perceiving? But if we begin to eat this way, then what we'll find is what Swami Sirteshwar described as, find a simple diet and forget about it. So people are all, and look, Master enjoyed cooking, and he said that we should enjoy. Why should we enjoy what we eat? Because when we enjoy what we eat, we absorb much more of the nutritive value. Where if we don't, then our consciousness, even though it may be technically healthy, our consciousness will be rejecting it. And that's a powerful repellent, a magnetic force that keeps us from absorbing the beneficial things. When he visited Yoganandaji, a society that had been created based on eating foods that were not cooked, unfired foods. They ate only raw foods. And this was the main center of their community, their philosophical basis. And he visited this group once, and afterwards they invited him to speak. And he said, no, I really don't want to say anything. And they insisted. So he said, okay, but you're not going to like what I'm going to say. And they said, no, tell us. So he said, look, you guys are so extreme. If you don't stop doing what you're doing in 2 weeks, someone's going to die from malnutrition. You just cannot keep going the way you're going. And of course, even though he warned them, 2 weeks later someone died. And there was another community that was based on food orientation. And one day they had an argument about whether they should eat this dessert or that dessert. And rather than making it and let people choose both of them, they dissolved the community. Because they were in food consciousness, they were still living in ego consciousness, they weren't seeking transcendence of the ego. And this is the basis of making choices in life. And this process of making choices that in relationship to how they affect our spirit is something that we extend. We say you are what you eat. But you are everything that you take in. It's not just food. Well, or you could say all of life is food. The sounds that you hear are food. The quality of the air is a kind of food. The people and the thoughts of those people that you are around is a kind of food. So we extend this idea of diet to not just the food, but the diet of your life, your whole life. And therefore, the music, the music that you listen to be heavenly music, uplifting music. Let the people that you spend time with be spiritually minded people. Let the environment in which you live. Now, when it comes to food, it's not just, as I mentioned this briefly, but I want to say it again, it's not just the food itself and the way that it's cooked, and often overcooked, but it's the consciousness of the cooker and the environment. If you go to a restaurant, you're taking in the vibrations of the cook. The spices may be blended in a beautiful way, but it also may be agitating because they had a fight with their spouse at home, or there was some argument in the kitchen, people were upset, and you never know where that food has been before it got onto your plate. And this is universal, not just India, but it's in most restaurants they call it the 3-second rule. If it fell on the floor but it was there less than 3 seconds, it's okay. You can put it on the plate. It's not, you don't really want to think about this. When you become sensitive, you begin to realize that there's a lot more going on underneath the surface of life. And this, we should be proper etarians. We should be proper livarians. The way that we live, the whole way that we choose to live consciously. So when the subject of diet comes up, it's not wrong to, if you're interested and you're seeking, you're experimenting, you're getting new ideas. Master's written quite a bit about little of this, little ginger tea and all these different things, and they're perfectly good things to be aware of. But don't think that you're going to get better only by what you eat. If you can find the diet that works for you, some people need more carbohydrates, others need very little carbohydrates. Some people can easily live on very light and elevating foods, and some people have trouble giving up the comfort foods that they like. But we want to make that simple statement: do we eat to live, or do we live to eat? We want to take more and more control of our lives as yogis, and this is the important side of it. So we really don't have any dietary rules at Ananda. As a group of people, we don't tell people what to eat or not eat. We do have a rule against alcoholic beverages. So, and in some cultures, wine would be considered food, not, recreation. But it's interesting, in the news in recent months, I've seen numerous articles, and even the chart that the United States government puts out every 4, 5, 6 years about healthy eating and food groups and all this. They've changed it, and meat is no longer considered the absolute foundation of a good diet. And of course, the beef industry complained and lobbied, now don't take us off the chart, because it's bad for sales. They don't care about health, they care about sales. So generally, and if you read in the Raja Yoga, the Art and Science of Raja Yoga, Swamiji's book, he mainly talks about eating more consciously and eating holistically. Try to eat natural foods as much as you can. Try to avoid overly processed foods that have ingredients that we say they're unnatural. But everything in the creation is nature. You can't. So, but they're processed to the degree that they take energy away from you rather than giving you energy, life force. That's why, interestingly enough, while we don't like the idea of killing things, we want to eat food that's alive, that has life force in it. So we want to eat foods that have positive pranic value. And if you begin to observe this in your life and inwardly ask God to guide you to the right diet for you, and in that process, you will discover what's the fuel that makes this body run the best. And if there are foods that you eat that you enjoy eating, but you know they're not designed for your body, then just cut them back a little bit. Don't emphasize them. When we create balance and when we live more inwardly connected, then we're less attached to the senses. And we can enjoy what we eat, but we should also be more concerned with how it's affecting our meditation and our ability to think clearly and to maintain a lifestyle that is beneficial spiritually. This is really the key. So normally I don't ask for questions, but because I'm talking about diet and I haven't gotten into much in terms of very specific things other than the spices and the vegetarianism, does anybody have any questions about diet?
Yeah, I was thinking about this only, that milk is like generally considered that one, as humans, we should not take milk because... The
milk is a very controversial subject. You should understand that milk and milk products, and fresh milk products, meaning dahi and paneer, would be considered fresh milk versus cultured milk like cultured cheeses and such. These are considered to be cooling to the system. And many saints give out foods that have this in them, and sugar. Sugar is generally considered a bad food, but yogis give out candy all the time. So you have to, they say that a little bit of poison keeps you healthy. If you get too pure, then you can't handle any caustic energies in your environment. So according to your body, some people's bodies are, they're aware of being really allergic to milk products. And of course, if you're allergic to milk, then it gives you gas. And so what's the solution? You get the no gas pills. You don't stop drinking the milk. You get the, and it's the same with antacids. Rather than eating a diet that doesn't cause problems, you get the antacids, which make you feel better in spite of mistreating your body. So these people come up with creative solutions. But there's not just one answer to this. Look, I don't know of anybody who wants to give up Babaji drink. Has milk in it. So what are you going to do? If your body doesn't like it, it says no, then minimize it or eliminate it. But there's no rule. That's the point I was trying to make earlier. There's no rule about it. It's not like you're a bad yogi if you drink milk or you don't drink milk. It's not a make or break decision.
I mean, just the similar thing, because the way they take out milk, from a cow or all these animals, that is also very, very cruel. So that is
it's not always cruel. She's asking about how animals are treated. And this is, for example, eggs. And now some people advertise our chickens are free range. We don't keep them in cages and such. And the subject of the treatment of animals is connected to but separate from whether you should eat their products or not. It's two separate subjects, though that they're connected. The thing about eating animals, is that from an ecological point of view, it's much more ecological to eat the food that you feed the animals than to feed the food to the animals and then eat the animals. The animals take much more resource to grow. So the way that we approach these things, and I think the point here is that isn't so much just what we eat, but the way that we produce what we eat does affect the vibration of it. And if you look at the quality, I mentioned earlier, I started eating organic beef after I had become a vegetarian and had problems, and I could taste the difference. The meat was different. It wasn't the same as other meats that I had eaten. So this is a consideration. But if you buy eggs, there's different kinds of eggs. And by the way, Master recommended vegetarianism, but he said, particularly because he was living in the West, he said Westerners tend to have a very rajasic environment in which they live, and so he said we could eat eggs. So many of the devotees do eat eggs. Swamiji ate eggs. But he wasn't saying that you should, he was saying that you could. And that each person should recognize how they are being affected by it. And if you're being affected by it and you don't need it, it's affecting you in a negative way, then cut it out. So this is key, is we teach all these techniques for meditation, and we give suggestions about how to use them. But each and every one of us has to make these teachings our own. And how we mix and match these things, and when we meditate, and exactly how we decorate our altar, and the foods that we eat, and which chants we do, and which books we prefer, and all of these things are individual. There's complete freedom in making these kinds of choices yourself. We educate ourselves, and then we make choices. We don't prescribe to the idea that we should impose very many. Master said, too many rules kill the spirit. Just figure it out. We give some basic education, and we can discuss details more, but the key is to be more conscious. And then we begin to figure it out ourselves, many of these things. And if we're, as a part of that becoming more conscious process, invite the Guru to guide your thoughts, and then be aware of your thoughts and how new thoughts are coming to you, then in that process you'll begin to understand things that you never understood before. Okay, namaste.